This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, we sit down with former Hampshire cricketer and now coach Jimmy Adams. He reflects on his playing career and how specific coaches really supported him on his journey, the psychological challenges in cricket and the importance of a player not limiting themselves, as well as players being confident and comfortable in executing a game plan. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Perfect. So first of all, listen, Jimmy, really appreciate you giving up a bit of time. I know this time of the year for you guys is kind of all systems go, but how are things? Are you all good your end?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. Everything's well this end. We come off a disappointing weekend. We got so close and snatched defeat from the jaws of victory up at Edgbaston in the first semi of the T20. But we've come a long way in that competition. And from where we were halfway through, I think all the boys should be very proud of what they've achieved. And we've got a big week coming up. The guys are up at Liverpool this week. If they win, there's a very, very good chance that they'll win the title for the first time in a long time, 40-something years, I think it is. But on a personal side, I'm done. My role is second team. We had our last game finish at the end of last week, so I'll be watching the live stream from afar and see if I get to Liverpool in good time. If it looks like we might get on the right side of the right result.
Perfect. So obviously for me personally, I being a Hampshire boy, I've kind of tracked, I guess, your progress in terms of a player, and then been fortunate enough through some contacts at Southampton to have you come in and speak to us in terms of your transition away from playing side into coaching, etc. But for people that maybe aren't as familiar in terms of you and your background, etc., do you just want to explain kind of, I guess, your initially playing career and then what that's transitioned into now?
Sure, I'll try and keep it brief. So I've grown up and been a Hampshire boy all my life. Played in the age groups back in the days it was Hampshire schools. It's moved forward on that front now, and I think it's a bit more streamlined and better equipped for the development of youngsters. I got my first contract when I was 19, or started in 2000. Had 2 poor years, got nudged towards university. Unfortunately, when the university system was well funded on the cricket side, had 3 years there where cricket kicked on. I came back to Hampshire and started performing, I suppose. There was plenty of ups and downs, as there usually is, but generally went really well, and then had a massive form dip in 2008. But luckily was backed by the coach at the time, which was Giles White. He took over the team in 2008. Having been second team coach, he backed me in, and he recommended me to go and see a coach in Perth in Australia, and that really tipped things. I hit it off with this guy and found what he was talking about at that time very pertinent to where I was with my career, and came back from there and had probably the best period of my career, 2009, 2010. And then was fortunate enough to take on a captaincy at Hampshire in 2012. And I suppose we did okay, and I did okay for a few years, and then I found the captaincy very draining. Let that go back, came back into the ranks of the group and had a couple more years, but by then my batteries are pretty empty in terms of I suppose that the drive needed every day to keep trying to perform. So I retired in 2018, and have been lucky enough, after just a short window of uncertainty, I've been lucky enough to pick up a coaching role at the club as well. And I'm now coach the second 11 at Hampshire, and spend a bit of time with the first team now and again, but mostly the second team. And it's been great fun, been really interesting, learning lots. And then this year had the fortune of being an assistant coach with the Southern Brave in the 100 competition, which was an amazing experience. So, probably the first time I've been outside of the Hampshire bubble, working with a few different people, with different players. So that was fascinating, and hopefully get another chance to do that next year.
Perfect. I mean, there's loads of really interesting bits there, and we'll try and cram as much in to the hour and a bit we've got. But let's kind of go in reverse to start off with. So obviously a lot of athletes, when they talk about that transition away from the game, do find it challenging, a change of identity, kind of going from a player to then something else. How was that transition for you? And what initially drew you to the coaching side when that was something that you kind of got into?
Yeah, good question. I'd been coaching on and off during the winters for quite some time. I started with a bit of, I suppose, private work alongside helping out with junior age groups, the Hampshire juniors age groups, and then the Hampshire Academy at times. So I'd been trying to get some experience in that area, work through some of the coaching badges or levels. So I had a good idea that coaching was something I wanted to get into, and Hampshire had been very supportive with offering the opportunities during the winters. So from that sense, I was quite lucky with the transition. I had 3 months maybe where I didn't know what I was going to do, and I was hoping and holding out that there might be a role. So from that side, I really was fortunate, but I sort of had been putting the feelers out and starting to nudge towards that, or nudge that direction.
Perfect. So obviously you mentioned there in terms of the jump and stuff, was there any particular succession planning you were doing when you were working with the younger age groups, or was it more just a case of, it's something you can do alongside your playing side?
I think that the nature of the cricket seasons, or the season, is that it fits quite well with allowing you to pick up off out of season work experience, whether that be in cricket or in another field. So it was quite a clear path for me, having been influenced very heavily by coaches throughout my career, and the help that I'd received. I certainly had a feel that I wanted to try and replicate that or give something back if I could. I had no idea whether I was going to be anywhere near capable of being able to influence people the way that I'd had influence or had been influenced. So I started with I remember working with the 13s. They would do little batting groups, me and Will Smith, or it was Will Smith. We used to do batting sessions for a couple of the batters from the 12s, 13s, 14s that had been being picked out as maybe being high potential, and almost rewarding them with an extra batting session a week. And then as experience grew and my understanding of how they talk about coaching philosophy, the coaching philosophy, I had no idea. When we first sat down in level 3 and they spoke about coaching philosophy, I had no idea what they really wanted or what I wanted. A lot of mine was based around my own experience and the people that I had or I'd learned from, both from a playing side and from a coaching side. And so it was quite important to get that experience and find out about myself and find out about how I saw my coaching. And that did help. Level 3 cricket, the coaching course there, and just recently done level 4, where I found out even a huge amount more about myself and others. I think that started to shape how I was. So while I had experience as a coach through working in those age groups, which was great, I certainly didn't know myself as a coach. So I think as my plan developed, I realized that coaching was much more than me throwing some balls to someone to see if they could hit a drive or play a pull shot. Whereas when I started, it was all about that. It was all about the technical, can they do this? And I suppose there is an important aspect to the basic skills element and learning, but how I delivered it and how they learnt, I had no idea about, and that's been a real learning for me over the last 3-4 years, I suppose, about the best, or how I can improve my ability to help people if indeed I can, although there's other people, the best people to ask for that. But I sense that if I look back at where I was in 2012, the winters I did there, coaching is a very different approach now that I would take with, even with the same under 12s, under 13s, I would approach it very differently.
So if someone was to ask you that question now and say, what is your coaching philosophy? And I know this is banded around a lot of sports, a lot of different ways. What would you say? What would you answer that question with?
Well, I think it's different for almost the level that you're coaching at. I mean, that's a very typical answer for me, in the sense I'm well known for sitting on the fence, but I've been lucky enough to work with professional or close to professional academy level, and I think a lot of that is about players working out themselves and us helping them do that and nudging them in the right direction, trying to empower them, I suppose, and almost, if we do our job well and help them to the point, then almost we become redundant, because they start to work it out themselves, and then they come to us with questions as to how. Leading into that, it's probably a little bit more a little bit more directed, and trying to give them the knowledge, I suppose, to help them make decisions that as they get older and more experienced, that they can start to ask themselves or coach themselves a bit. But my philosophy now, when I'm working with the pros, is very much about the person, trying to find a way to stop myself and others and themselves individually limiting themselves, playing to their strengths, understanding what their weaknesses are. But really, the mental side of the game in cricket would be a huge aspect to that. And so I would spend a lot of time trying to create a relationship and rapport with players, so they're able to open up about what stuff might be limiting them. So there's something like I saw a really nice, or read a really nice a phrase, I suppose, not even a phrase, almost an equation that was performance equals skill minus noise, or talent minus noise, and that noise being internal, external noise, self-talk or stuff that influences from the outside. And I think in cricket, where there is a lot of time to be inside your own head, that when people start to realize the power that, for good and for negative, I suppose, the positive and the negative side of the mental game, and how that can help you, that'd be a huge part of I'm not particularly well trained in psychology by any stretch, but I'm just about to try and start along that path. But that'd be a big part. That'd be my primary area, is the person, and then building the cricket skills around that.
Something you really interested there is people limiting themselves. What do you mean by that?
My sense is, and you asked a really good question earlier about my own experiences and how that might be sort of bias in there, and this would definitely be an Adams bias, is that my self-talk was terrible. I always doubted myself. I always looked at what others were doing and felt that was way ahead of where I was. And then if I sit down and watch a video of myself doing something, I go, okay, that's much better than I realized or thought at the time. And so from there, my sense has been, for a decent number of players, and it's not all players, because some players are very full of bluff, and that's actually can be a strength of theirs, as long as they realize or understand that that's how they operate. That they will limit themselves by getting down on themselves very quick. Even guys that striving for perfection is wonderful, and it's great that guys want to improve, but then they can be so quick to get down on themselves if they don't do it. Whereas actually they're still making progress. They're still working towards their goal or what they were looking to do, but they just don't give themselves a chance to look at it with a bit of perspective and go, actually, you know what, actually I've got better at that. It's not ideal, but I have improved from where I was, where I started. And that, I think that overpowers that. And they go, well, I'm not very good at this. We actually, no, you're getting better at it. How good's that? And that side of it, I think, is that certainly when it comes to people limiting themselves, or they play the bowler rather than the ball. They play the situation or the context of the game rather than trying to take it down to what's the one thing that they can do. Well, I can give all of my effort into this one ball at this moment in time. We spoke a lot in the winter as an example of that, of in T20, the pressures that we feel as batters, or in any field, but certainly as batters, we spoke about it. And he said, if you had a red emergency button that no one could see you press, and it sort of had comms through to the dressing room, would you press it? And everyone said yes. But when we're out in the middle, we don't, because our ego and our pride and our we feel we want to be in control of it, doesn't want to let us do it. And then we do something rash, and we do something that we walk back to the change room going, why have I just done that? But actually, if we had the opportunity to walk to the other end and ask our partner, what do you think about this? Or to have comms to the coach or someone that you trust in the change room and go, oh, no, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? And most of the time they're right, and you reinforce it and they're actually okay, but they just need to trust themselves to do it, but they don't. And then they start. That's why I think that we limit ourselves in all facets often. So that would be I've waffled a bit there, but that's mine.
No, I think it's really interesting. And, I had this in a recent conversation with Mark Robinson, who we spoke about previously, saying how much of a psychological game cricket is, in terms of it is kind of me versus you, but then you've got another 10 fielders in a round, and obviously there's pressure of run chases and all that type of stuff. And I think that's a really interesting point you make around people looking at, well, I'm bad at this, rather than I've improved to where I was 2 weeks ago, a month ago, 2 months ago, and it being a kind of evolution process. I'd imagine for your second team guys who are obviously looking to make that jump into the first team, be that in red ball, white ball cricket, a lot of your time will be spent on, I guess, trying to develop them to hopefully get them to the stage where they can make that jump. So how do you go around facilitating, I guess, those types of conversations? Because it is a case of there's going to be self-doubt if you've gone from second 11 to first. So, like you said, not limiting themselves, but also them having a self-awareness of what their strengths are. And, if they do get an opportunity, this is the way that I'm going to be able to play in order to solidify potentially a spot in that team.
Yeah, language, how we communicate them as coaches, but also as players, their peers, senior players. If we can communicate well ourselves, then when we can use a common language that the players they're hearing regularly, then I think that will help. That starts to make them believe, and that becomes norm, I suppose.
Have you got any examples of that?
So we would communicate a lot with Vincey, AD, Alfonso, guys coming through from second team to first team. So Tom Prest, for instance, who's made a pretty quick climb this year from having, no second team last season because of COVID, and really going from, I think, maybe 1 or 2 games the season before to suddenly playing regular T20 cricket anyway. Making sure the messages that Charlie and myself and Tone use with him in the second team and in the academy, what we're looking for him as a player, how we're looking for him to play, that's carried through to the first team, so that when he's in the first team, he's not being asked to do something that's different. He's being reinforced in the same areas of strength that we see him. So hopefully he starts to hear Charlie talk about it in academy level, me in a second team level. When he jumps into the first team, he's got AD and James Vince talking the same game plans, the same. This is what we want from you. This is how we're going to use you in this thing. And he's seeing a clear transition there of how this is me. This is my strengths. These guys know me. They're backing me to do this. rather than, I suppose, the flip side of that would suddenly to change their role, change how they've played and what's got them to there in the first place. In nets, we would, second team's an interesting one. We don't net as much as we play a lot of cricket, so we don't net as much as perhaps you'd imagine from a training and a progression of skills side. So the guys often learn a lot in game. So we spend a lot of time walking around the boundary with players, but if they're out or if they're bowling and they've obviously got their feet up for a bit, just trying to pick up, get a feel for where they're at, how they've gone over the last period, their thoughts when it comes to the game time. But when we do get training sessions, it's about what they're looking to get from this specific training session. So trying to get them to think more specifically about what their short-term goals are, I suppose, from a net. Whereas in the first team, you suddenly go to guys just wanting to get ready to play, and we're always looking at progression. And when you're gathering that info from the players, you're then feeding that info through to your fellow coaches, to the support staff from whether that be physio, S&C, because you want clear and similar messages coming back to them. So it's a lot of corridor conversations, I suppose. This is one of the things I've heard people talk about. We don't necessarily sit down and formally review things and make sure that we're on the same page. A lot of it will be catching up with guys over a coffee, popping in, seeing AD and those guys while there's a game going on, maybe before we're training, trying to see if they can come down and help out now and again, and so you have a bit of a smoother line of transition for guys if they're hopping between teams. So it's I wouldn't say it's something that we specifically have outlined as like this is how we're going to operate, but I think we try and keep comms to the point where both players and coaches are aware of where guys are looking to go with their games and how they're looking to do it.
And so when people are trying to make that jump, so if I use the England team, for example, in the one day is currently you've got Jason Roy and Johnny Bairstow who opened the batting, in terms of the figures and what they've done, they're up there in terms of world cricket. So people trying to get into that role, that's going to be particularly challenging, but there may be openings in a slightly different role further down the order that may be different to what they would play at county level. I'd imagine you'll have the same challenge at Hampshire. You've got obviously James Vince, for example, who's captain, bats 3 or 4 potentially, or opening in some of the T20. If you've got a young player, to say that you're going to go into your number 3 spot of James Vince there is probably unrealistic. So how do you go around getting them, one, to identify that, but then 2, kind of go, well, this role might not be applicable to you right now, but there's a different type of role maybe at number 6 where you could have success because you've got the skill sets to do it?
Well, a really interesting point, and to some extent, I think you've almost nailed it at the end of the question there. It's a conversation with the individual, talking about their futures, their roles, or their roles currently, where they want to be, and where those opportunities might lie. The tricky thing is getting them to buy into that. But what you said there is that these are the options. We actually see your skill set either being well suited to batting at 6. We know that you want to bat at 3, and we like your skill set for that, but we actually feel that there's some skills there that can work at 6. Or you frame it slightly differently and say, well, you can develop skills at 6, which we feel you're capable of, that can help turn you into a much more complete player. So you've got James Vince being a great example of someone who's at the moment would be probably MVP in county cricket. For you ask other counties which player they would like most, and you've got someone like James Vince who plays in every format, is right up there as a batter in every format. He's a captain, he's a leader. There's so much to like there, but you can actually sit down with James Vince and with Vincey and say, look, your T20 cricket and you feel a little. I certainly feel a bit sort of sheepish for doing it. He's come off. He's won the Big Bash recently, and man of the match in the semi and the final there, I think. And he's, you know, our best T20 player. But there's still stuff that he can evolve his game with. And we're not saying that his game at the moment is poor, but we're just saying, imagine if you've got your strengths and your super strengths. Imagine if we add some stuff to this. Imagine if you can play a scoop and get it over fine leg. Imagine if you have just a reverse sweep to a spinner. Therefore, they need to have two men behind point, and you're so strong at extra cover that brings in, you get more bang for your buck when you hit it through extra cover. So your AD Birrell, who is our first team coach, I'd love to have played under him, but he talks about selling things to players, and the skill there is getting the buy-in, so that you turn something that we see as a need to a player into something they really want to do, because they see the benefits of it, and they don't feel it's going to take away from what you know, their strengths. They see it as a mutually beneficial addition to their game, I suppose. And that's quite exciting when you talk to players, and when you see the glint in their eye, when you see that penny start to drop, it's a really nice and rewarding feeling. You then obviously got to go out and do it as a, you know, in training and practice it. But that first bit when you see a player go, oh, okay, I start to see that, is really rewarding. And the other way you can do it, of course, is to say, if you don't do this, you're going to be knackered, because this is how we're going to bowl at you. But we've done that in the past, where we've taken analysis. We'll run an analysis of opposition batters, for instance, and now we ask our analysts to do it for our own batters. And we say, come the end of season review, or if it's something that we feel is more pressing than that, we'll do it earlier. But certainly end of season review, we'll sit down, and we might not show it all to them, but we'll use it as some evidence to say, this is where we go. James Fuller was an example of that. He incredibly powerful strike zone. You know, if you pitched it up to him a few years ago, I mean, it was scary when we practiced in the winter, but he'd take you down. But did anyone bowl to him there? No, everyone stuck it under his armpit or into his chest, because that's where he struggled. So he spent, well, to his credit, he realized that he had worked that out, but we had the stats to back it up in terms of strike rates for where the ball was. And he spent a winter doing it, and now he's become hugely improved, and that would be a hot spot for him in terms of a high strike rate. So there's different ways of skinning that cat, but I think the most important thing is, as you alluded to, is getting the player on side.
So when you're looking,
do it.
When you're looking at the actual, I guess, technical sessions that you're doing during the winter to try and improve on that area, what would they actually be doing? So if we look, for example, someone trying to be more productive out of a pull shot because they're getting peppered with short balls at the moment, what type of sessions, what type of work has actually been put in over the off season to kind of try and hone in and improve that area of their game?
In terms of what we would actually do,
yeah.
We would probably, if guys have got specific technical improvements they want to make, we would probably get them in a bit earlier. We do a lot of group sessions through the course of the winter, but we'd probably look to pick up a lot more individual sessions with someone who's got specific technical or tactical areas that they want to work on. And that would involve machine work. That would involve sidearm, might even involve really stripping it back and doing some underarm or throw work just to try and get basic movement patterns involved. My take on it would be, I'd often let the player lead a lot of that and try and drip in my thoughts as they go. From a really pure technical element, there's some areas where I'd certainly use Tony Middleton, would be sort of our batting guru, and technically I think is right up there with anyone that certainly myself, and I know a lot of the guys have come or worked with or come across. So I might go to Tony just to get some thoughts, or to hopefully maybe a little bit of reinforcement for what my thoughts are, but that's not always the case. And they might even actually work with Tony for some really, and use the video. We were lucky enough to have a bit of couple of lanes in the indoor school that have video that we can use. And you can hit a few balls and then go in, rewind it, have a look. I think players often find that very powerful because they often don't see it themselves. And I've got a 6 and a 7-year-old, and they've learned more from watching the telly, watching other people do it, than they have from me telling them how to do it. So I think that area of being able to see and trying to copy, or trying to being aware of what you might be doing and what you might not be doing that you think you were doing, can be really powerful. But we'll often spend, a lot of it will be drilling. And I know there's lots of different thoughts on how best to acquire skill. And so that's been a fascinating addition to us for trying to work out how best to add stuff. But a lot of guys like the repetition. So you're balancing repetition with that variable training, trying to work out ways for them to work it out themselves, I suppose. Work out the different patterns, get their bodies do it for themselves before we come in and tell them this is how it should be done. If they can crack it before we get there, then that's the holy grail, really. But often it's not the case, because pros have spent so long playing a pull shot one way that trying to get them to change it can be tough, and that can be the hardest thing, I suppose, getting guys to understand that it might not be a quick fix. This might take a while.
And I guess something, this is me observing from the outside, and I could be completely wrong on this, but what you see at points is people almost completely change their style. So if I look at Labuschagne, for example, who all of a sudden became like a mirror image of Steve Smith in terms of the way he was leaving the ball and whatnot. I guess it's always a constant push for a batsman to say, obviously, I want to rectify this area of my game, which might need me to open up my hips slightly to then allow me to come through. But obviously, this is then going to present more potentially LBWs, or I'm going to nick off because I've got an open blade. So I'd imagine that's kind of a psychological battle within yourself and the technical staff to actually figure out what's the right way to go and how much reward's going to come from actually making these changes in a technical base.
Yeah, spot on. Absolutely spot on. And players understanding that this is what we're looking to work at. We're looking. So Joe Weatherly made some big changes 2 winters ago. He went actually and saw a coach outside our system, which is fine. It's absolutely, it's great if you find someone that you click with, and we sort of rolled with it along. When he came back to us, he would go and see Gary for a few sessions, and we'd ask him how he was doing, what he was doing. We'd try and pick up and build from there. And he had changed his game to access the ball to mid-on and hit straight, play much stronger off his legs, and then be very disciplined in the corridor. So out sort of fourth, fifth stump, he was prepared to let them come to him and leave the ball out there. But he found that, or does find that, that's quite mentally challenging. You're having to leave an awful lot. Your scoring rate can be held back. And obviously you've seen Joe develop as a T20 player in this season, and he's come on leaps and bounds, and now he is stuck between two stools. And I want to access more balls from the offside, but in doing so, he's now getting into his channel more, which means he's both nicking balls and getting LB. His challenge this winter is going to be, okay, where do you want to take your red ball cricket? Do you want to be the player that's disciplined and grinding out runs and having to be super, super tough mentally and disciplined in that channel? Or do you want to potentially be a player that takes it to the bowler more? But you've got to understand that brings with it fallibilities that people might try and expose. We've sat down with guys and spoken about players over the last 10 years with records in county cricket. So you've got, I think it was Trott, Sangakkara and Cook were the three that stood out. Jonathan Trott, high LBW percentage. And if you potentially use that as a negative, then you start working with Jonathan Trott about how to not get LBW, maybe hit straighter. But by the same side of that, you're probably taking away his biggest strength. And the one thing that was noticeable with Trott was that because he was high LBW percentage, it was like he decided, this is how I'm going to play. I will get it wrong sometimes. That's going to happen, but I'm going to accept that. Alistair Cook, very high caught behind caught at slip ratio, like really high, 90%. And so, well, if that's how he's limiting the rest of his dismissals, he's confident in his ability to leave the ball. He's going to get out at some point. I think the trouble comes when, if you're Alistair Cook, not that Alistair Cook would do this, but if you're one of a Hampshire young player and you see that you've been caught out at the slips the last 4 innings, you start to do something about it without realising that the greater perspective of it. And then you try and go across your stumps, try and shut down your corridor, and next thing you know, you're getting out LB. Exactly as you said, it's just guys being aware of the tweaks. Often it's nothing. Often it's just that people are bowling well. Sometimes there is a technical element that needs to be looked at because it's being exposed. I suppose that the general outcome is what you're averaging probably while these things are happening, but it's even that I think is tough at the moment. We've guys averaging 25 at the top of the order, but in September, 25 at the top of the order is a good effort. If you're averaging 25 at the top of the order and it's a hot summer and you play most of some of your 4 days in May and June during that period, then you might have to ask some questions. But certainly in September, you go, well, this is a pretty good effort here. If those openers get through the first hour, that's a win. But I've digressed there. I think that, from what you said about it's just the communication for me with a player about what their method is, how they see their game plan, and is your method allowing you to execute that game plan effectively, and does it need tinkering or tweaking to allow that, either the method to fit the game plan, but more likely the game plan to fit the method.
I think that's really interesting because if you look from the outside, like Sky Sports time, the analysis they're able to go into on the TV and stuff is really interesting. But imagine if a player was to buy into that all the time, it could almost be paralysis by analysis. You're just constantly overthinking. Whereas the Trott example, I think, is a really good one of going, actually, I'm going to get out 90% of the time, it being LBW, and I'm comfortable with that. And other teams may target that, but I know that's also going to bring me runs because there's going to be breaking points where the ball's not going to swing as much. And actually, I'm just going to be able to clip things off my leg the entire time. I'm going to lead outside off. And then you go, they might say, well, this is a problem. He keeps getting out like this. And he says, yeah, but this is the only way I'm getting out. I'm not getting out pretty much any other way. And I guess that's a narrative that sometimes isn't always brought up during those commentary bits.
Yeah, and there's so many aspects to it. The conditions, the bowler, stage of the game. There's lots of things that can come into that, and you want to be aware of that as a batter. There might be a certain bowler that you have to be really, really careful about how you set up, and you might slightly change how you're going about it, about that person, because he's exceptional at exposing that particular element. Vincey, going back to James Vince, they completely tore him apart, didn't they, for nicking off driving. But you ask anyone that watches county cricket about who the best cover driver of a ball is in county cricket, there's a very strong chance that their top 3 would include James Vince. Now, the things that Vincey has to take into account when he steps up to test level, or when he, hopefully there's another chance there for him, but when he did, is the angle of delivery, because it got exposed a bit by left armers. The quality of bowler, I suppose, is a part of that. So maybe he has to try and hold that back for a period. The swinging, is it swinging today? What's the wicket like? What's the situation of the game? Actually maybe counter-attacking is the best thing for Vincey to do at certain stages. But there's so many facets that come into it. What's Vincey's confidence like? If he's in prime, if his confidence is high, well, I think you just tell him to play and react. If he maybe is not quite feeling it that morning, then perhaps he does have to just hold himself back for a period and say, well, do you know what? do you know what, JV, I need to be a little bit more disciplined this morning, because either I'm not quite feeling it, I had a bad night's sleep last night, or I'm a bit sluggish, or I don't know, it's 10:30 and it's September and the ball's nipping around. They're the sort of all the things that run through your head. And the tricky bit is that you hear most of us talking as people, as a batter, is that you don't want anything going through your head a lot of the time when you're actually facing the ball or as the bowler's coming in. But a little man on your shoulder doesn't half chat away, and it's what we spoke about, limiting yourself. And I think this the bugger on your shoulder that starts to limit you, starts to sit there and go, oh, do you know what? I don't think you should do this today, or this guy's doing this today. The wicket's going to do this. Or he's bowling quick today. He might bowl bouncing. All these things come in and stop you from actually being able to react. A good friend of mine, James Hildreth, he's obviously at Somerset, and he said he was asking Ponting about batting, and Ponting, they left the conversation a little bit, but Hildy turned around and Ponting just threw a ball at him, and Hildy caught it, and Ponting just went, "That's batting." I was like, "Oh, you know, I quite like that as a little message to people." But how often we're able to do that is tricky, because normally there's a bloke there going, "You can't catch that ball. He's going to throw it to you in a minute, and you won't catch it, and you'll look silly for making a mistake." You put those voices to bed, I think you're already on a pretty good path.
No, it's really interesting.
Sorry, I've digressed there.
No, it's really good. Listen, I'm never going to bemoan someone bringing up someone like Ricky Ponting, so that's absolutely fine. So, go into your playing career. You mentioned briefly how you went away over a particular winter and with a different coach, and it kind of changed your mindset, and then had some success after that period. So, do you just want to talk through, I guess, what the decision was, what the I guess the shift was, what you did over the winter, and then what that allowed you to do when you came back over and started playing again the following summer?
Yeah, sure. So I went to see Giles White had worked with a coach in Perth called Noddy Holder, Neil Holder, but obviously Noddy for obvious reasons. And Noddy had a reputation. He'd spent a long time working with Mike Hussey, Justin Langer, and had a pretty glowing reputation, certainly in WA and in Australia as a whole. But he was based in Perth in Western Australia. And I had no idea about Noddy. I was trusting Chalks, and Chalks really felt that he might be able to help. I'd had a year in 2008 where lost real confidence. It's probably as close to the batting yips as someone could get. Yeah, anyone that's seen or had seen me play know that my feet I had lots of triggers, lots of movement, and I didn't really know what I was doing, where they were going. I didn't trust anything that I was doing, basically. And my game had become a real grind. My role was as a red ball opener, and the fact that I lost trust in my method didn't help with the fact that I struggled to really hit the ball. I struggled to do anything but bat time. And so when my strength was batting time and being able to block, basically, and that wasn't being married up with my perception of myself, I'd lost faith in my ability to do that. It wasn't a very good combo. By luck more than anything, I got a crack at the end of that season in a couple of, I think there were 40 over games at the time, and Giles just said, "You can go in at the top of the order and enjoy it, give it a whack." And I did, and found a way. I got a couple of scores, and I think that started a little bit of a thought that, you know what, maybe there's a bit more that I can access here. Went to see Noddy in Perth, and I remember the first thing he asked me, he said, "Tell me about your cricket and your game." And I said, "Well, I think I'm pretty good at defending, or certainly I'm perceived as being good at defending." And he said, "What?" And I said, "Well, when I'm batting well, I think I'm pretty solid and I defend the ball well." And Noddy looked at me as if I was mad and just said, "So you stop the ball?" I said, "Well, yeah, I defend it." He said, No, you stop the ball." okay, well, I'll let you roll here, Noddy, because I don't really know what you're on about. And it's slowly but surely he spoke, and the way he talked about language, he spoke about hitting the ball. You're there as a batsman to score runs. The fielders, and he took it to a real extreme, but he did it in a jokey way. But he said, so when you asked him to, I took guard in the nets. He said, why are you taking guard in the nets? I said, oh, just so I know where I am. He said, yeah, but you're going to hit every ball, so you don't need to worry about the stumps. Then he spoke about the fielders, and he said, well, the guys behind you, they're there to watch you bat, the slips, they're watching you bat, and the guys in front, they're there to go and get the ball when you hit it. And I was like, oh, okay. And slowly I started to go, okay, I get where you're coming from now. But geez, it felt miles away from what I thought I was capable of. And part of my game that I was also struggling with was that I got quite badly hit by Andre Nell, I think in 2006. And I'd always struggled with my confidence was low. I'd struggled thinking about the short ball. And obviously my confidence was rock bottom 2008. So I went out there with one of the things I said to Lloyd, so I really want to work on the pull shot and the short ball. And we spent all winter, well, it wasn't all winter, it was half a winter, working, that was always a regular feature of what we did. And he just spoke about watching the ball, tracking the ball, and the positions that we got into, which were very different to the positions that I'd always thought about. He spoke about basically fronting up to the ball. I was like, really? That doesn't, so my soft bits getting in the way of the ball, that's not going to be particularly pleasant. But he soon made me get past that and realize that, well, I wasn't going to miss it. If I watched the ball, I was going to hit it. And he was very clever. He started pretty slow. He called them variables. He added shorter balls. And then he went through all of those, line and length. He went through that before he upped the pace. And, obviously by the end, slowly building it, we got to something that I believed I could do. There were other elements to the technical stuff that he did, but most of it really was about mindset. By the end, I reckon I gained as much by sitting and having a coffee with Noddy as I did by hitting balls with Noddy, really. I certainly remember having one session where we didn't even hit a whole bucket of balls in an hour, and walking out of there thinking that was a great session. Whereas before, it would all have been about quantity rather than quality, and not really understanding that how important my mindset was to my game. He was a great believer in that sort of a choice. You have a choice as to how you approach something and how you turn up. So you get up in the morning, how am I going to approach today? He loved that stuff, so we'd always be talking about that, and I think it slowly turned me into a disciple of his, really. And it did make a huge amount of difference. I mean, my method was still wacky and had lots of pitfalls, but I think mentally I was able to cope with it most of the time. That certainly wasn't always true, and there were lots of ups and downs, but I think I became much better prepared for the rigors of cricket and what it throws at you. And also then at a similar time, when we came back, we signed, and this is a bit of a tack on, but we signed Neil Mackenzie, who was just an incredible player. And I remember watching him back going, Jesus, there's not much to Macca's method. Really simple, actually quite limited. And yet this guy's a genius. And it made me start to realize, I changed next to him for a number of seasons, made me start to realize how important our mindset was. I only ever saw him lose his cool once. He came in and I was really taken aback. So I asked him about it at the end of the day. He said, it's because it was a mental error. And he explained, basically, he then said, well, go back through your last 10 innings and have a real honest think about what's happened in the lead up to those dismissals or in that dismissal. And as soon as I did that, I was like, oh, crikey. Yeah, I've been limiting myself here. I hadn't seen the red flags that the man on the shoulder was waving at me, basically. And if I'd been able to control those better, then And I think I started to control those better as over the next 2 or 3 years, when I was probably performing individually at my best. I had really good control over how I was going about stuff. And that was thanks to Noddy and to Neil, really. I mean, Giles was a big part of that, because he showed a huge amount of trust in me, taking me from an opening batter that was barely averaging 20 and saying, look, I think you can do this.
And do you think that's a cultural thing? So I look at, for example, again, listen to commentary. Shane Warne was on comms recently, would discuss kind of what was happening with Mo and Ali or whoever else was bowling, and his first thought was always, how are we going to get him out? That's what he said. He said that should be the first thing. Although, yeah, there's going to be limiting runs at points, they shouldn't be just bowling to go, oh, I'm going to limit runs. It's to get him out. From what you're saying there, it seems like that's a shift from going, I'm not going to get out, to I'm going to score runs and I'll hit the ball, which means I'm not going to get out, rather than your first thought being, I'm not going to get out. You look at someone like Kevin Pietersen in the infamous Ashes. I know there was a bit of discussion around him or Graham Thorpe at the time. And obviously KP was very much, well, no, I'm going to attack you and put you off your line. You look at with Shane Warne, he would try and attack him to get him out of rhythm, etc. So do you think that's a cultural thing with maybe some of the South African players or Australian players, and a difference to what we inherently normally have over here?
Fascinating question. I think you could be right. I don't have any info really or data, apart from a bit of, you know, us probably thinking that might be the case. But I agree. I find it. I certainly would be on. My thought would be that's more likely to be the case than not. We obviously individuals have different personalities and the way they look at it, but I think culturally, probably certainly the Australians, that definitely seems to be part of their I'm gonna get you before you get me sort of thing. I'm gonna take the positive. Warne was an incredible human being, you know, on and off the field, but on the field he was incredible.
Why do you say that?
Well, I mean, I've been not anywhere in the same stratosphere as Warne in terms of captaincy. But you go on the field and you're like, come on, lads, we can win this. And deep down, you're like, well, I've got to say that. Again, we're battling really here. And I honestly think that Warne could see that. When you get the old winometer, whatever they call it, and it's got the game as 90% to someone and 10% to you, and you just like, Warne saw that 10% and didn't see it as 10%. He saw that as 50-50, and he had this incredible ability to, possibly because he was so good, he had done it, and he had proof, he had evidence that he could change a game, or that we as a group could change a game, mostly on the back of him doing something. So that evidence was important, because if you keep telling people we can do it and you never do it, well, no one's going to buy into that eventually. But the way he said it, and so I do think there is a cultural thing there. Now, I don't know about us, as whether it's Hampshire or England or whatever, but that cultural thing must be important, because if you look at what Morgan's instilled in the 50 over team and the T20 team, they've had some shockers, but overall they keep backing how they're going to do it, how they're going to go about it. I'm sure the way they talk about it is in the same, with exactly that in mind. I'm not very good, my memory's bad, but there was definitely a game where they got thrashed by, I want to say it was by Pakistan. Look, could be wrong, and England were chasing, I think, and got bowled all out for nothing. Nothing in a 50 over game. And the commentators are there go, you can't keep playing like Morgan wants them to play. Can't always go out there and bish bash bosh it. They need someone to hold things together. And Morgan came out at the end of the game and said, no, look, I can't fault the guys for the way they've gone about it. This is how we're going to play. This is what we're looking to do. And that that backing from your peers and your leaders is priceless. If someone gets out in a certain way and the first thing you do is get the stick out and bash them for it, then the chances are they're not going to go there again. They're going to be worried about getting it wrong, and then that's limiting people. If they get it wrong, the first thing I would do is ask them, look, you get that ball again, what will you do? And they say, well, actually, do you know what? I'll play the same shot. And then it's just a case of execute it better. How are we going to execute it better? Well, that's either practice, or did you not execute it because you weren't fully committed, because you were worried about the consequence of, oh crap, I can't get out. Imagine if I get out and I leave the team in the doodie during this period, which I'm back and jumping here, which was what was so brilliant about Saturday, when we were 2 down for nothing. We just lost James Vince to our best player, and arguably on a big day, our biggest, if not, if you're being a bit cynical, you say our only hope of a score. If Vince on a big day out at Edgbaston finals day, got 2 youngsters that really would benefit from having Vince to bat with. And Vincey gets out, Presti's out not long after. We're 3 down. I think we were 2 down when he did it, but Joe Weatherly came out and swept his second ball for 6. And you see the guys going, wow. But actually, it's what we've been encouraging them to do all season. So, Joe, this is your best shot. We've rarely seen you miss it. Take it to them, put them on the back foot. Imagine if you're the bowler running into bowl and they know that that's coming and you don't miss it. Be brave with it. And if you got out doing that, that would have been fine. Toby Albert got out playing a ramp shot. Absolutely fine. It's his shot. If he gets that away, we're there going brilliant. We're not there going, wow, what's he doing? Why has he done that? And I think that becomes, certainly in T20, becomes an absolutely crucial part of it, because you have to play without fear in T20. But if you're not giving people that freedom to do that, because you say, why have you done that? Then they're not going to do it. They're not going to try anything. They'll just bat, and then next thing you know, they'll get out for 10 off 10 balls, and that's no good either.
I guess at the top level in the 100, or obviously where Hampshire are at the moment in international scene, you're working with skillful players and skillful people. So actually, it's just enabling them to be confident enough and saying, listen, if that skill goes wrong, next time we'll work on you executing it better, or if it was a different decision, look at that. But we're not going to hammer you in the changing room. We're not going to hammer you in the press. This is what we want you to do. So, you've got our back in to go and do it.
Absolutely. And you said enabling. I think that's a great word for it. And the other thing that comes from that, and certainly I didn't realize it until I got into the situation on how things have been, is stuff that's said in the changing room while you're cricket, you all sit there watching. So if someone gets out in a certain way and you just mutter under your breath, or you say to someone else, oh, what's he done there? Why has he done that? Oh, then everyone hears it. So it's not just the individual that you pick up with afterwards. It's those almost throwaway lines that can actually hinder or help if you do it the right way. But certainly we're more prone to getting it wrong, I think, as coaches and players. And next thing, we've spoken about Warne. I remember sitting next to Warne. I used to do lots of 12th man when I was at the start of my career. So I couldn't hit the ball off the square, but I wasn't a bad fielder. And Warne would be there going, how's he missed that? What's he doing? You've got to be scoring this off this over. This guy's terrible. We should be taking him down. I'm thinking, oh my God. Imagine what he's going to say when he sees me batting. And I wasn't at that time strong enough in myself, or didn't have the self-belief to be able to just brush that off. And especially when it comes from someone like a Warne, who's everyone listens to. So those things may be a reflection. Go, actually, it's actually quite important that how we react during games or during practice. Not so much during practice, but during games especially.
one of the things, having done a little bit of research and picking up on what you said earlier, you mentioned around coming back and having success when you were captain. So obviously there was a couple of tournaments, the Clydesdale Bank 40 and the T20, where you made some good scores, and obviously Hampshire at that time had a real reputation for being very, very good in white ball cricket, with some obviously good players in the ranks, etc. Was there any particular reason as to why you guys think you were so successful during that period?
Well, you touched on part of it. We had a good group of players and the balance of the team was pretty decent. And one thing that I've often, when I've been asked about this, I think the role clarity was very good, and the trust between players to execute that was very high. We knew what Dimmy would do when he took the new ball, and if it didn't go to plan, it was well, that must be someone playing well. Therefore, we need to find a way to manage this. We knew how Michael Lunn would go at the top of the order, or Carbs would go, and you felt that was the case for everyone. So you felt really well supported and backed, but you also knew that if it wasn't your day, it was likely to be someone else's. And that's where probably the strength and depth of that group really helped. But I think the role clarity was really clear. Neil Mackenzie, who was the glue during a lot of that period, I don't know how he did it, because I think it's the hardest role certainly from a batting side, to be able to take games deep. And he did it early, and I think everyone went, yeah, he knows what he's doing here. We chased, this wasn't actually a white ball game, it was a red ball game. We chased a score at Notts. I remember sitting down and guys going, what's he doing? We need to get a move on. What's he doing? We're not going to win the game if he bats like this. And Matt was just going about his business. I remember having to move. I couldn't listen to it because I was there. Well, look, guys, we've had our chance. We want to be out there doing it. We've had our chance, and we've got to leave it to Mac and the other guys. And Matt got us over the line. He hit a few boundaries out of nowhere, and we won the game. And I think everyone went, okay. And that was the evidence that those guys needed for him. Probably the best example of knowing role clarity, or just knowing and everyone just trusting each other, was when we fielded. Everyone knew where to go, and if someone went into a position that they probably shouldn't have been into, I don't think there was the ego that anyone kicked a stink about it. And we got plenty of stuff wrong, but we had at the time, Dimmy was our white ball captain, and his outlook was incredibly positive. So he would always encourage people to play with freedom, play to your strengths. And slowly but surely, we all started to believe it. And we had, again, this is chicken and egg. We got early evidence of it. We got rewards, and we saw that what we were doing was going to enable us to, or going to take us to places that we wanted to be, and to win games that we wanted to win. I don't think there was any great secret to it, but we were very lucky during that period.
Put myself on mute there.
Okay.
For you, on a personal note, obviously you had some success on semi-finals and finals days, etc. How much was that a validation for all the kind of hard yards you'd put in over the winters and stuff, to say on pressurized environments, when ultimately trophies are being won, that your mindset and the mindset shift that you had, that actually you had evidence that it did work and you were going down the right path, and you didn't need to listen to the little man on your shoulder?
So I'll probably contradict myself a bit here, but it's not meant to be. So absolutely early validation, and those things did help, but they often came towards the back end of say the following summer. I remember Giles White, I got 48, I think it was, against Worcester, one of the first games of the season, and we got 300. And Giles, at the end of the day, I was just walking off, and he just tapped me on the shoulder and said that was a really important innings. And in the context of it, it didn't feel, I was frustrated. I felt I should have got more. I think I batted till about 3:30. And I think this is where I'm going to contradict myself. So, I spoke a lot about Noddy being positive and the way he went about it. Now, I was so far down the line towards, blocker, and so far away from being Noddy's ideal, that Noddy just pulled me a little bit towards that. So I didn't turn into this maverick gung-ho batter. I had success in white ball, which is great. And but in red ball, there was this really interesting, well, not interesting, depending which way you look at it, but for me, a fascinating balance of intent with my core, probably values, but core role, which was to bat time, to see off bowlers, to try and be there at lunch, to try and be there at tea. So in this game here, I got to nearly to tea, got out to 48 or something like that, and was disappointed. But the fact that Giles went out of his way and said, that's a really important innings, made me go, well, do you know what? There's more to this than a 50 or 100, or how this, when I grew up, we always saw the scorecards, and to get on the scorecard, or there's little highlights of the scorecard, you had to get a 50. So I don't know whether that was really something, but there's always something about those landmarks being important. And the fact that someone acknowledged something that I'd done that hadn't really ticked any of those boxes actually was really a really big fillip. So that was evidence, but in a different kind of evidence, I suppose. So I agree completely. Evidence is really important. It's the hardest thing, to keep asking someone to trust their method if they're not getting the evidence at times. And the nature of cricket, certainly of batting, is that you can do everything right and still not get a score for a run of games. And that's where it becomes tricky. But white ball wise, I was very lucky that that validation came through selection, as opposed to necessarily, I managed to hold myself in a place in the T20 side when I didn't think it would be. They dropped Neil McKenzie, which was remarkable looking back. And from that, I got a score in that game, and that went on from there. But I suppose that's personally, I valued the trust and the backing of people, of peers, and of coaches. So those little conversations were crucially important. They might not be as crucial to other people, but certainly for myself they were. And that was credit to Giles for reading me like a book.
And you mentioned right at the start, you said something about you became captain, and then after a number of years, you found it challenging and a little bit drained from that experience and stuff. So I guess first question is, why why were you drained? What aspects of it were you not expecting? And I guess secondly, off the back of that, when you look at someone like Ricky Ponting, for example, who obviously was captain of Australia for a number of years, I guess what level of admiration do you have for him to be able to sustain that role for such a prolonged period of time?
Yeah, the guys that have done it for a long period, I absolutely, hats off to them. I think it's a credit to them as players, and probably more importantly as individuals, that their natures allow them to carry on performing and carry on leading a group in the way they have done. How people did it many moons ago, and Martin Nicholas did it for I don't know, a decade or whatever. I think it's just mind-boggling. But even Vincey now has done it for 5-6 years, and how he keeps progressing himself in that role is brilliant. Personally, I found I suppose more than anything, it was managing myself, but also managing other people. You wanting to help people, but then finding a tough balance between helping myself as well and helping others. And perhaps I at times worried more about that side than I did about making sure that my own side was going. And then, of course, when my own side started to slip, then I started doubting whether I was the right person to do it, because you felt you still need to perform. It was tricky. I really enjoyed it, but I got to the end of every season. I asked Giles if there was someone else that he thought might want to do it. And it was maybe it was my ego wanting a little bit of reassurance, just say, no, you're the right man, which obviously was nice. But actually, I think it was more than his. I just got to the end of the season, I was bushed. And after a month, I recharged the batteries and was good to go again. Just the constant thought process of how to get the most out of everyone else, I suppose. And that could be quite tiring. And certainly there are individuals that are very good at looking after themselves, but there are also individuals that are quite high maintenance, shall we say. So that probably in hindsight was one of the things I used to find myself get very quickly fatigued by certain individuals and how they operated. And that wasn't to say like, all the guys are good guys, but some people require a lot more TLC to keep themselves in a good place. And if you're the one that's providing that, then that I've certainly found. I'm quite introverted, so giving time and energy, or spending time and energy, that got burned away pretty quick. And then, as I said, then I might not look after myself in the way that I used to have done. And next thing you know, it was both sides of it before. I didn't feel I was spending enough time with the others, and I wasn't spending enough time with myself. And I was like, need a break.
No, that makes
quite hard to get a break in the season.
No, it makes complete sense. So last question for me, and it might be a challenging one, but who is the best player or coach you've worked with or against, and why?
Whoa. Coach is really tricky. I'll have to. I've been so lucky, but if I was to say one, and I think because of the longevity of my relationship with him, I suppose I'd love to say Noddy, and he was brilliant, but I think Giles was the one that put me in touch with Noddy, worked that sort of help with that, and obviously still someone that I suppose work with my boss now. So maybe I've sort of, but I don't. I think Giles has been incredible, really, both from personal and as a group. He's been around for such a long time, and I think his ability to manage individuals is right up there. He understands people. He's always got time for people. I know I sometimes worry about whether he has enough time for himself and his family, but I think that goes such a long way when you feel that someone's invested in you, and they're trusting you, and that seeing someone be genuinely happy to see other people sort of succeed is a very powerful thing, I think, to know that someone's there with you and they're going to back you. So Giles would be from a coaching side, and as a player, that Neil Mackenzie is my sort of batting and playing idol. He was just a genius. Just the way, for someone that was, and I don't know whether he'll like me or not for this, but he really was limited. He had a low back lift. He didn't power hit. He used to spend hours on the bus doing these forearm curl things with a weight around a stick, going, guys, I'm going to hit some sixes. This is going to help me hit sixes. And he didn't do it for any other reason as to just to get guys to have a bit of a giggle, really. But he had an ability to empower individuals. And again, he's a very switched on man, Mac, and I have a feeling that he did know what he was doing. He would come in and say, look, guys, I can't do this. I need you to do this for me. And it made that honesty and that vulnerability, I think, made us all open up and made us all realize if he was capable of doing what he had done with how he perceived what his game, then we were certainly capable of maximizing our game or getting more out of ourselves. So the way he went about it was just brilliant. And he was obviously, you won't hear anyone who knows him say anything other than that he was the ultimate team man. Ultimate. He had proper, spoke about this with Giles, and it probably shows my values to some extent, but the time he gave to people was, I haven't come across many like him. So he'd be right up there. That's my little worshipping of Neil.
Perfect. Listen, really appreciate your time. Loads of great anecdotes and information there. And yeah, just all the best for the end of the season and whatnot. Hopefully you guys get over the finish line and hopefully catch up with you again soon.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael. All the best.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.